Well, hello there, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and a quick heads up that today we're going to be talking about the BMI, which means we're probably also going to talk about things like weight management, weight loss, and probably diet culture. So take good care of yourself, and if that's not a thing you need to listen to, don't, and that's okay. You know, when I was thinking about the show and how we get into it, I have this very, very clear memory of the first time I learned about the BMI. So it was around this time of year. We're recording this in the spring. School hadn't let out yet, but you're starting to feel that like excitement that school is about to. And at the time, my mom was with a man who worked for the New York State Police Force. And they had recently issued this like height and weight chart that he brought home. And I thought at the time that it was really just a height and weight chart of what it meant to be healthy to be a cop. And I'm around 14 this time. And, you know, I'm real tall. I'm a big woman. So I was already around like maybe almost 6 foot tall, like at least 5'11", and probably like 180, 190 pounds. But I was also playing varsity basketball and varsity volleyball, even though I was only in junior high. So I was a big kid, but I was also really dense and really active. So this guy catches me in the living room. He shows me this height weight chart and how to read it. And yep, I'm overweight. And I don't know if you know this, but pro tip, if you want to mess with a teenage girl's self-esteem, you should tell her there's something wrong with her body. So you can probably guess I don't really love the BMI. And fortunately, it seems these days like more and more people are starting to call into question the use of this tool that maybe isn't as useful as we've been led to believe. But just in case either you need some persuading, maybe you've got some questions, or you're a practitioner and you want some more information so that you're making good choices, well, you're in luck. Because today's episode is the next in a series of episodes that we've been doing looking at controversial and sticky topics in the fitness and wellness space. So in January, today's guest came on to share his expertise on an episode titled, Is Dieting That Bad? Hint. Yup. In April, the episode was titled Fat Bias and Public Health. And today, he's going to tell us what's wrong with the BMI. He's the content development and production manager here at NASM. He's been in fitness for over 20 years. He's got a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in exercise science. He's currently pursuing his doctorate in health science and organizational leadership. He's friend of the pod, and he's Eric's boss. Rich Fahmy, welcome to Better Than Fine.
Thank you, Darlene. I like the Eric's boss thing. That's funny.
Yeah, I feel like, and if you don't know who Eric is,
true.
Eric is our producer.
Yeah, I'm just the guy Eric calls up with issues and needs. I don't know about boss, so that's.
I mean, you're
a
boss.
Well, I appreciate
in my
that.
opinion.
I appreciate
You're also
that.
the guy who, after the last time you were on the show, you texted me a screen grab of myself with the subtitle "Resting Rage Face." So, you know, it's going to be another one of those episodes. So let's get to it.
I think so. I don't know if this one will be as rage-inducing, but we'll see. We'll see. I don't know if it's my goal to just induce rage. Although your story from childhood, one, I'm terribly sorry to hear that. But two, it actually, yeah, I can gather. That actually is a big part of this, that height and weight, the old height and weight charts. And BMI was supposed to be an answer to those. Yeah, and it really isn't an answer to those. It's just statistically a little bit better, but not actually any better at deciding anything. Yeah, we can get to there.
Take us on a journey, Mr. Fahmy.
Sure. Normally I start out with ground rules. I don't know that we really need ground rules on this one. I think we can just kind of go through and talk about what BMI actually is, and what is it purporting to measure? How was it actually developed in the first place? How did it come to be? And then, is it valid at predicting health outcomes? We'll talk about that because that's its main argument or use case, I guess, right now in public health and fitness and medical professions and the insurance industry, which has a big play on this one. So we'll look at the validity of using it to predict health outcomes, and then when can it be useful? Because there is an argument for when it can be useful, but it's not really anything that any individual professional needs to worry about. So we'll talk about where it's useful. And then also, is there an alternative to BMI? So we'll get into all of that goodness.
Good. We got some ground to cover. Let's get
Okay, so BMI at its core is it's a measure of relative body weight, and it's a calculation of my weight in kilograms divided by my height in square meters, so my height squared. So weight divided by height squared. What that really means, it's a mass to surface area calculation. So if we remember from geometry or calculus, the surface area of something is like saying the floor is a 10 by 10 room has a surface area of 100 square feet, right? 10 times 10. And so what the BMI is trying to get at is how much mass lives within the surface area that my body occupies.
I think I'm going to give it away here, but if I'm guessing, the problem is that we're not talking about anything to do with density then, right?
No, total
right.
mass.
Right. Like
Yep.
it's just, so I know one thing I've encountered is, like my husband's also a personal trainer. He's been a trainer for 20 years. He's kind of a freak athlete. And so his BMI is well into obese, even though he has a low body fat percentage because he's very dense, which is also my deal is like I have heavy organs and like heavy bone density. Like the quality of my tissue is very heavy. So I am heavy, right? Like that's,
yes.
If we take the geometry of it, like, there we go. Okay, episode done. Let's go home.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we don't need to get into it a whole lot, but how is my height squared an even decent measure of my surface area?
Yeah, that was my immediate thought. It's like,
yeah.
I'm 6'1". A lot of like skinny models are 6'1", but I'm a very different 6'1" than like an underwear model or a catalog model, right? My frame is totally different. So what is the length of my femurs have anything to do with the surface area of my body, right?
Right. Yeah.
Is dumb.
None at all.
It's
Yeah.
dumb.
Pretty much.
So it's a dumb supposition to begin with.
Yes, and so it does not, to reiterate your great points there, it does not tell you anything about the sources of your body weight, the density of your tissue, the distribution of your body weight or adipose tissue, and the endocrine functionality of a person's adipose tissue. All these things can have an effect on what weight does to your health, and how they interact, along with a bazillion other factors that impact someone's health and weight. It's got limitations with people of color, particularly women. Of course, muscled people we talked about to some degree, and athletic populations. And then there's just this other thing of, is the logic flawed just to begin with? Just at its most basic level, is people kind of say, oh, BMI is a reliable measure and I hate this word, but it's the word that's out there right now. Is it a reliable measure of body fatness? Right? Does it actually measure that? Okay.
Well,
and
can I link that back to a phrase you just said for the benefit of the listener, which was endocrine function of your adipose tissue? And so can you just unpack that phrase, which I think then leads directly into the point that you're about to make? And I just don't want to leave anybody behind.
Yes, yeah, great point. So we've talked before about skeletal muscle being an endocrine organ and how exercise stimulates that, or physical activity stimulates it to release kind of this pharmacy of chemicals and signalers that positively affect a lot of functions in the body. Adipose tissue, we've always, not always, traditionally we've thought of adipose tissue or body fat as energy storage, right? But it's not really only energy storage. It actually is an endocrine organ itself. So it emits and puts out there signalers, hormones, all kinds of things that affect different body systems for the better and for the worse. Now, just because I have more adipose tissue, let's say, than what is considered normative, that doesn't necessarily mean that that endocrine organ of adiposity or endocrine organ of adipose tissue is going to negatively affect me because of two things. We don't know that my body is as sensitive to the things that my adipose tissue is releasing, and it could just be that because of genetics and luck of the draw of the genetic lottery, my adipose tissue doesn't behave as a negatively functioning endocrine organ. Right? BMI doesn't really say anything about that. But that's how
So
we get to people who are higher based on BMI, but they're metabolically perfectly healthy, of which there are a lot of those people.
yeah, so what you're saying is just being heavier doesn't inherently like mean you are unhealthy, and even just having more body fat does not necessarily mean that you are metabolically dysfunctional, right? Like adipose tissue sends out signals, and it could be lots of different kinds of adipose tissue, and it's not just default bad.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the
So
distribution and the type make a difference
you
too.
were leading us somewhere. Take us there.
Yeah, that's just the basic logic of it too. So, you know, if BMI is are we saying BMI is a reliable measure of body fatness? Well, think of it this way. If because of the way it was formulated, which we'll get to in a sec, if someone has obesity or overweight, their BMI is going to be high.
Hmm.
But it doesn't mean that someone with a high BMI has obesity or is overweight. So
Mhm.
it's like saying, hey, for my birthday, I got a puppy. Well, you can assume that my birthday present has fur. Right? But if I say if I go backwards and I go, my birthday present has fur,
It's not
you can't
necessarily
assume
a
it's a
puppy.
puppy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I
Right.
dig
So
that.
that's the logic there. Just is the logic at its basic level is flawed.
So you're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My kind of quasi guest co-host, to you're less than just a guest, or more than just a guest, excuse me, is Rich Fahmy, and he's here to share with us what's wrong with BMI. So where do we go from here? So I've got a puppy. I got a birthday present with fur, and also it's a puppy. I've got a high BMI and also excellent bone density. Please continue.
There you go. All the factors. And that's really what a lot of this comes out to. So if we look at how BMI was developed, it's going to shed some light into really how we arrived today and how we got to this place of BMI being considered to be so valid. So it was developed in the 1830s. So BMI is almost 200 years old.
Woof.
And I'm going to butcher this name. He's Belgian, but it's French pronunciation, but it's Lambert Adolphe Jacques Quetelet.
I did better than I would have done.
And he is a Belgian statistician, sociologist, astronomer, and mathematician. Notice none of that said physician.
Yeah, I was like, I
Or
heard math guy. It's a
he
Belgian
is.
math guy.
Yeah. So where this came from is actuaries, so people who assess risk for outcomes in a population. Usually, they're really big in the insurance industry, but these actuaries were looking at they were reporting high death rates. So he wanted to investigate, were there any physical characteristics that were related to those high death rates? So basically, is there a relationship between height, weight, and dying? So that's what he wanted to look
I
at.
I have heard that tall people die a little bit earlier than short people, but other than that, that's all I've got for
Uh-oh.
that one.
Oh no. It's like a big dog versus a small dog, huh?
Yeah, it's like you've got
Yeah,
more cells, it's more likely something will go wrong. Anyway, I rabbit holed
right.
us. I apologize. So,
Gotcha.
Belgian, 200 years ago, math guy.
Math guy. And let's keep in mind too that in the 1830s, it's not like there was a large proportion of people in larger bodies to begin with. And the thing that really the leading causes of death were infectious disease. So,
Yeah.
lack of hygienic environments, particularly in large crowded cities that kept increasing in population over the years. Tuberculosis, typhoid fever, diphtheria, pertussis, scarlet fever, many cases of fatal pneumonia and bronchitis. So that was really the main cause of death, leading
Do you
cause of death
know
at his time.
do you know if this is pre general awareness of germ theory? Like, is this that far back? I don't have a sense of when germ theory became common knowledge.
I don't remember when that was, but I remember reading
Mm.
something about the lack of hygiene they were looking at as being because of the overcrowding in urban areas in particular, the lack of hygiene and medical practice, just
Okay.
in general, and a medical practice was a part of it. So I would imagine that
Yeah,
maybe
I
by
think
this time
so.
there was at least a thought that would be something.
Okay.
So Quetelet, I'm not going to say it. I don't know.
You're
I'm just
doing
going to
great.
start calling him something else.
We call him Jacques.
Used
Just call him by his
used
like middle
call
name.
him Jacques Lambert. So
Lambert.
it's spelled Lambert. So that's what I really want to say, but it's Lambert. So He used weight over height squared because it was more statistically stable as height
Because he's a
increases,
math guy.
because he's a math guy, compared to weight over height, which is a lot of that basic ratio of the height weight tables, right? Or there was also another calculation of weight over height cubed, height to the power of 3. And basically weight, I'm going to get to that sec. Weight over height squared was just statistically a better thing to use as height increased from a a statistical standpoint, because that's what he was, a statistician.
So I
Now,
have a sense of where you're going. What
yeah,
population was available to him, Rich?
his population consisted of only white French and Scottish men.
What a very
So
specific demographic.
that's a very specific demographic. The other thing to that's really important is he himself did not advocate it as a measure of adiposity or fatness, as people say, researchers say, or what have you. Its original design was to assess risk and death patterns of a population, not an individual.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even at inception.
So I think what I hear you saying is math guy was looking for easy math things to look at big level data, like trend level data within a population.
Mm-hmm.
So how did we get from math guy going for easy numbers he could play with to my doctor going, well, your BMI is over the overweight line.
Yes. Oh no.
Oh no.
Okay. So, all right. So I'm going to see how fast I can take us on this little journey. So, an American physiologist named Ansel Keys, who's best known. Have you heard about Ansel Keys?
I've heard about Ansel Keys. Go on.
Okay. So, most known for his 7 countries study, but there's a lot of controversy around this guy. But there are some things that he did that I think were useful from a population standpoint. But his big deal was quantitative biology. So,
explain what that is.
Just trying to put numbers and statistics to factors of health and population health. So to get a good understanding of what's going on, using numbers and stats.
Okay.
He tried
More
to
math
advocate
guys.
more math guys. Yeah, and he's a physiologist. He's also one of the first people to say that there's a link between heart disease and diet, even though there's lots of problems with how he went about doing that. But he did, to his credit, he was one of the first people to say, look, heart disease is not just an inevitability of aging, lifestyle is a part of it. So if we go really a 30,000 foot view, then there's some validity there. Now the research and all that stuff, and we can get into that, but it's not necessarily about BMI. He also had some pretty negative and devastating comments on obesity. So there's that. But if we stick to BMI, he was basically advocating for dropping the height and weight tables used by the insurance industry because he felt that there was a better, more valid measure of adiposity and then heart disease risk. The problem is he didn't really show that. He just showed that that BMI is better than weight over height because it's closer to skin fold caliper body fat measurement. So his main thing was, can we get an adiposity measurement that relies less on height and is more closely related to actual tissue distribution and density, actual adiposity. Now, just because it was better than the old-fashioned white, oh my God, I keep saying it, the old-fashioned weight versus height. So there's a lot of subliminal stuff in my consciousness right now. By saying, just because you say it's better than weight divided by height, does not mean it's all that great in and of itself objectively.
I think I hear a few fallacies here, right? Like the first fallacy is having more adiposity is inherently bad. The second is that on an individual level, we could use some kind of measurement of height and weight to kind of throw a dart at your adiposity. And if you're tying it to insurance, you're also now tying it to some kind of like outcome implication and also therefore like payout and support. So is this like life insurance or health insurance?
life insurances, I believe. I couldn't
Okay.
find which one, but life insurance was the one that kept coming up. I mean, then the issue here is BMI was used as a sole marker to determine life insurance rates.
Ugh.
Um, so
So
the
fat
issue,
people pay more for life insurance because of Ansel Keys.
yes, you can thank Ansel Keys. The,
Hey.
hey, thanks, Ansel. People, he did live to 100, which was, or like almost 100, either 99 or 100, which was interesting. But I couldn't find the quote, but I saw it, and his quote basically said his longevity, or no, his whatever condition he was ultimately afflicted with, he couldn't say that his weight had anything to do with it, which he wasn't necessarily. No, I think actually on BMI he was, because I believe he was shorter in stature and kind of a muscular guy or something
So
like
his
that.
own
Don't quote
BMI
me on
wasn't
that.
great. That would be
His
funny.
own BMI wasn't great, but he wasn't really, his health, again, his risk wasn't really correlated to his BMI.
Yeah.
Um, Imagine that. So, but people may be of no greater risk than someone who has a normative BMI, but yet you're assigning them, you're calling them as someone, or you're categorizing them as someone with greater risk, and therefore charging them more. It could also disproportionately affect insurance coverage for people of color, because remember the study population was mostly white people,
And
right?
men.
So and men, white men, and BMI is most problematic for women of color.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it actually could, on the basis of someone's race, increase their insurance premium, right? And we already know there are obviously socioeconomic or social determinants of health. There's all these different things that play into that. So there's many factors here, but this is one factor that can have a negative financial impact as well. But the to think about, well, we might get to this a little bit later, but what's the right perspective here? Are we treating those in larger bodies as diseased and automatically unhealthy, or are we looking at a broader population that they could be more vulnerable to certain health risks, and we need to address some lifestyle factors that could quickly compound into a real health problem, right? Like, what are we really using BMI for? And I think the second one is more of an appropriate use case.
Yeah. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My guest co-host is Rich Fahmy, and we're looking at what's wrong with the BMI. Like, what's up with that? So where do we go from here?
Well, I think there's lots of good evidence on this, but I have lots of notes, but we can see what we can pick out. The next thing to really talk about is it actually valid at predicting a health outcome of an individual?
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think you could probably tell where we're going to go with this one, but let's also recap that it is used by health professionals, fitness professionals, insurance companies to decide if someone is healthy, or if they qualify for a procedure, or if they have to be charged more for life insurance. So they're using it as the simple sort of gate, right, or red light, green light, to a category of all kinds of things. Right, and even the CDC website. So this is a direct quote from the CDC website when they talk about BMI and healthy weight. BMI screens for weight categories that may lead to health problems, but it does not diagnose the body fatness or health of an individual. That's a
Okay.
direct CDC quote.
Well,
So,
maybe, but no.
right.
What? So one thing that's just come to mind for me, and for a listener who hasn't listened to the episode we did in January, Is Dieting That Bad, where essentially looked at one of the most surefire ways to ensure that someone will gain weight is to put them on a diet and then wait for them to come off it, and they're going to end up at the same weight or likely heavier than they started. And then the April episode, Fat Bias and Public Health, we were looking at all of the ways that our public health system kind of treats people in larger bodies worse, and oftentimes the stress of that treatment and the lack of treatment perpetuates negative health outcomes. And it occurs to me, as somebody who had this happen to her, like, oh, you have an overweight BMI, you really should go on a diet. And now, because you're presenting that information and not looking at a whole person and what their other health indicators are, you are causing the chain of events that then likely leads to adverse health outcomes. Do you have any thoughts on that, or just do you want to nod and we can keep going?
I mean, the nod is a huge nod, yes. But there was a specific example I did find, and it was on disordered eating, and it was something around. So I'm gonna see if I can find it. It was something around basically someone in a normative BMI may not receive treatment because someone just assumes if you have an eating disorder, your BMI is
Low.
the overweight or obese category. So a lot of people get overlooked and misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed because of their BMI, and that goes both directions. So someone may have a higher BMI and the physician goes, well, this must be your problem, or someone may have a normative BMI and the physician goes, well, weight control isn't your issue, and all these different things can't be your issue. An eating disorder can't be your issue because your BMI is fine. So then,
Yeah.
you get people don't get the care they need. They don't get the right diagnostics, and they don't get the right diagnoses as a result.
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to talk about this today, so I don't have the data and statistics right at the tip of my finger. So, listener, forgive me. But I know that I have read information around eating disorder diagnostic criteria, which I think I talk about in the orthorexia episode, if you want to go back and dig into it. But essentially, that being underweight is one of the diagnostic criteria for having an eating disorder. And so people who are in larger bodies with eating disorders don't get diagnosed because it's not considered part of the diagnostic criteria. And there are some wonderful research practitioners out there starting to do research to build the body of evidence to change that diagnostic criteria, because if you're paying attention at all, you know that that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited and heartened by those people out there doing the good work to change things in a positive way.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folks doing that too to get this right. And I mean, if we want to go sort of at its most basic level when it comes to BMI and health outcomes, it just does not. BMI doesn't take into account body composition, adipose tissue composition, distribution, metabolic differences, lifestyle behaviors, genetics, weight loss history, mood disorders, childhood trauma, fat phobia. Right? You can't living conditions.
Other
All
forms of
these
chronic
things.
illness,
Yes, other forms of chronic illness.
thyroid conditions.
Yeah, all these things that affect someone's health and are predictors of health outcomes. So no, it can't be used to screen for someone's individual health. Um, so there's lots of research correlating body size and health outcomes in multiple directions. However, there's a part of that is there's lots of evidence showing metabolically healthy people, regardless of any excess weight, have no greater risk or risk of death or disease than those in the normal weight spectrum. And I know we talked about this one a little bit on the last show, but I actually found some better numbers too. Well, one of the numbers I think I brought up last time, but one of the researchers said, look, we have to think of things in of a set of 6 phenotypes. And by a phenotype, I mean a grouping or a set of characteristics driven by the interaction of genetics and the environment. So that's a phenotype. And the 6 of them are basically normal weight, quote unquote, individual with that does have cardiometabolic abnormalities. So they're metabolically unhealthy. Normal weight, who is metabolically healthy. Overweight, who is metabolically unhealthy. Overweight, who is metabolically healthy. And then obese, who is someone with obesity who is metabolically unhealthy, and someone with obesity who is metabolically healthy. So it's normal, overweight, obese categories, basically metabolically healthy and unhealthy in each of those. So there's just 6 categories. So for those that are of a normal weight with who are also metabolically unhealthy, there's 16.3 million adults in that category.
Oh yeah.
People who are overweight in the overweight category who are metabolically perfectly healthy, 35.9 million adults in that category. People who are considered, go ahead.
Oh, no. You go ahead.
Yeah, last one. People who are considered obese as having obesity based on BMI, but they are metabolically healthy, 19.5 million adults in that category.
So soft quotes normal, and of course, I hate the phrase normal weight because
Mm,
whatever the hell that means. So normal weight, but metabolically unhealthy. There are more people who are soft quotes obese who are metabolically healthy than there are normal weight people who are metabolically unhealthy. But we're out here saying that the people who were conditioned to think look better in their underwear are somehow better off than the people who are actually having metabolic health.
exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Can
And it,
you really drive it home for us? Um, you have a vast knowledge and expertise, so I trust that even if this isn't in your notes, you got this. How does someone know they're metabolically healthy? Right? We throw that phrase around. What does that mean in the numbers?
Sure. So let's see, the numbers here I may not have off the top of my head, but we do have what the research defines as metabolically healthy or unhealthy. They're looking at certain markers. So those are things like blood cholesterol, triglycerides, blood pressure, and insulin resistance.
Yeah,
So when I'm taking all those
A1C,
things
right?
together, A1C, and so I don't have the ranges offhand. It might be like 5.7 or something like
Mm-hmm.
that on the
Yep,
A1C.
I know that one off
Um,
the top of my head.
yeah, okay. So and then blood pressure, right? 120/80 is your normal, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
LDL versus HDL, good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. So that's what we're looking at when we're saying metabolically healthy. Are all those things in line with within range from a blood panel perspective, right? The doctor is going to look at these things and say, okay, everything's cool.
So if I've got good cholesterol, good triglycerides, that's not how you pronounce that word, good blood
Mhm.
pressure, and a normative A1C, I'm metabolically healthy. And there's I think what I hear you saying is regardless of what my BMI number is, if I'm metabolically healthy, there is no correlation between my BMI and my health outcomes.
Yes, correct.
Okay, there you go.
Exactly.
Boom.
Exactly. Yeah. If I'm metabolically healthy, regardless of my categorization on a BMI chart,
Don't
then my
matter.
health outcomes aren't any worse. So the thing that so I tried to look at some of the statistical analysis because they tried to see, okay, what is it that creates what we would consider the non-intuitive categories, right? Someone who's a normal weight but they're metabolically unhealthy, and then someone who has excess weight but they're metabolically healthy. So they did some analysis, and what they found is the things that showed up were the factors that mattered in creating those non-intuitive situations were smoking, waist circumference, and physical activity.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense
So
to me. You want to unpack them?
sure. Well, I mean, smoking is kind of an obvious one, right, in terms of
Yeah.
your mortality and
It's,
likelihood
it's not good for you,
to
everybody.
yeah, it's not good.
Surprise.
News flash. You may want to check the Surgeon General warnings on those packs of cigarettes. Again,
Mm.
everyone has their own choice. I'm not going to bash smokers because I feel like they've already taken so much abuse. My dad was a smoker.
I was for
Um,
12 years.
yeah. So let's
There's a
let's not.
mic
We're not
drop
going to.
moment.
Yeah, we're not going to bash people. Um, because obviously, the smoking is a very complex issue. But anyway, from a public health standpoint, yes, we know that smoking is considered something that contributes to health risk.
Yeah.
And then physical activity, obviously, what we consider. So on this one, we can go really deep on this or not, but it's just the when we talk about physical activity and exercise, we're talking about the national guidelines of 150 minutes per week of moderate activity or 75 minutes per week accumulated of vigorous activity. But as we know from certified wellness coach, don't try and hit those numbers, just move more, right? Try and get some
Yeah.
activity in when it makes sense. So, and then waist circumference. So this one is a waist measurement taken at the narrowest point between the lowest palpable rib and the top of your pelvis or iliac crest. So whatever that point is, it tends to be around the belly button. It's not usually the belly button, but it's around it. That's waist circumference. And that one has stronger correlations to cardiovascular disease risk, type 2 diabetes, and I'm not finding it in my notes here, but anyway, but there's other, and cardiac issues there. It's actually a much better predictor than BMI.
Yeah.
So the reason that is because we're looking at, if you ever heard of visceral adiposity, or basically abdominal adiposity. So fat in and around your abdomen and internal organs is deemed to be more harmful to your health than someone who has the pear-shaped distribution of adiposity, right, where it's more lower body. So that's what waist circumference gives you a better picture of. So that's why waist circumference, smoking history, and physical activity are really what we're looking at. And if you put that together with someone who does have metabolic abnormalities, right, they're metabolically not perfectly healthy, and they have lack of physical activity and excess abdominal adiposity or a high waist circumference measurement, then that will predict my health pretty in a pretty stable fashion from a statistical standpoint. But it's all those things.
So you're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My co-host is Rich Fahmy. We're looking at what's wrong with the BMI. But Rich, you also said at the top of the show that there are some uses for the BMI. I think I heard that right.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're putting a bow on this, if it were me, I'd want to throw it out entirely. But I know that there are consequences to that. So can you talk about, like, what is this math guy garbage fire actually good for?
Math guy garbage fire. I love that. I love math guy garbage fire.
Mm.
So here's what it could be good for. Now, we're also going to talk about how public health professionals do recognize its limitations and issues too.
They're
Or I just
starting
talked
to.
about it. I just talked about it by saying that. So what could it be good for? For capturing population level changes in average body weight. Population level, that's the key term there.
Okay.
And
Okay.
creating categories to visually represent those changes. And in that sense, it did help us categorize obesity as an evolving disease of increasing frequency, right? Those things are, that is true in terms of BMI did help us figure that out, or not figure that out, but at least categorize it and frame it that way. So it's okay as a population study tool because it's also easy to do. Right? I just need someone's height and weight. I can't go out and put everyone through a DEXA scan or like a water displacement or air displacement or a
That's not
CT
Star Trek.
scan or a skin fold calipers, right? It's easy to use from a execution standpoint, and I can get large data sets. So that's really its only utility if we're going to go there, is large data sets. And where it could be helpful is public health can then go, look, there's a population where BMI is higher. Do we need to take another look here? Do we need to divert resources, programs, services, funding to say that, is there, because if they have a higher BMI and we dig in and there is a higher incidence of metabolic factors or metabolic abnormalities, and there's a higher instance of, let's say we dig in and a waist circumference is higher. So, then there's low incidence of physical activity, right? For whatever socioeconomic factors, for example, maybe it's unsafe, so people don't feel good about going outside and exercising, or there's no green spaces, right? So there's no natural areas that people can take advantage of and move more. And, so in that sense, it can be helpful because I can look at a population and go, well, this could be a sign of need in this population, but that is it, right?
Yeah.
It's
So
not good for medical approvals, life insurance rates, fitness, a health predictor, and public health professionals recognize that it's problematic. They know it's problematic, but its utility is strong.
yeah. So I think what I hear you saying is use the tool in the way that the math guy who designed it intended, which
Yes.
was trend level data instead of the way we try to bootstrap it. And I think it's also worthwhile as we're coming to the end here to recognize that while there is a positive public health use, I know I've certainly seen times that it's being used to do like weight loss drug research or weight loss diet research. And we're looking at BMI change, and typically it's in the short term. And for all the reasons we talk about in those other episodes, like those things are not short term things. And BMI is not a really good representation of it because it's not taking into the quality of tissue that's being changed in either of those specific use cases. And I just want to call that out because I think if you're only hearing about what the positive use could be, if public health professionals are starting to use it in a positive way, you're not necessarily considering the negative ways that it's still influencing all of us and our perception of ourselves and one another.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to add anything
Absolutely.
to that.
Well, and you know, when you bring up research, the body of research too. If I look at a weight loss drug and I've got a trial of 150 people or something, and I'm using BMI, that's not going to be very helpful. Right?
No.
When I say population, I mean population, right?
Yeah.
50,000, 100,000 people, the nation,
Millions.
you know, national population, billions. So if I'm looking at I'm using it as a main marker for success on a group of 150 or 200 people, that's already problematic. So there's a lot of existing research that's problematic. And where we're really shifting to is people are going, we don't have anything better to get large numbers of people done. This is sort of what we have. It's a mathematical predictor, and we know it's not great, but it's easy to do. So that's where we're heading with it. And I did find when we can wrap it up with a what's the alternative, and waist circumference is a good alternative, like we talked about earlier. It's harder to come by in research, but it is, based on what I was able to find, it is a better predictor for type 2 diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure, stroke, and gallbladder disease. So then BMI, it's a stronger predictor of those conditions than BMI is.
Well, I was about to say this is essentially a call to action for all you math peeps out there, not just guys, but math persons, to like come up with something better, but you gave it away. You already got one.
Yeah.
Well, Rich, thank you again for being part of this little experimental series. Can I put you on the spot for something? Something I didn't prep you for?
Okay.
Well, you were one of the people that worked on Certified Wellness Coach. And of course, we give away the promo code because we want Better Than Fine listeners who are interested in this stuff to become wellness coaches. And so you probably heard my promo a million times. Is there anything you want to say as someone who, like, CWC was your baby, to tell people why it's awesome, and that if they want to actually help people, like, why do CWC? Or you can make a weird face and I'll say so.
Why do it? Wow. Yeah, that's a big question. You always hit me with these loaded questions on these shows, these big ones. If I had to sort of bottom line it, which is not going to do it justice because it's an amazing course. I mean, just the experts alone that we worked with, I still pinch myself as a nerd to some of the people that we got to work on this with us, including yourself. So the it's filling a sorely needed gap in our work as professionals when we want to help other people, because it really does take a look at that holistic approach. It's not so much like the nuts and bolts of exercise and counting macros and all these different things. It's really more like, hey, what's your relationship to all these things? What's your relationship with movement? What's your relationship with food? What's your relationship with other people? What's your relationship with stress? And when you really get down to it, you're helping people figure that stuff out on their own, because that's what coaching is, right? It's client centric. They're figuring it out. You're guiding them on a path of self-discovery and their journey that is relative to their needs and capacities. And there's nothing like it in terms of the approach that you want to take with your client. I can't tell you too that I've gotten I can't say lots because that's an exaggeration, but I've gotten more than a few messages from various social media platforms saying that this was the approach they always wanted to take with a client, but they didn't know how to put it all together, and so they felt like CWC did a good job of that. So we're very proud of it. So
bang. So if you want to do that thing that Rich just talked about, Certified Wellness Coach, well, listen up, because I got a little gift for you. Listeners to this show get an additional 600, yes, 6 with 2 zeros, dollars off, using the code Marshall CWC. So it's MARSHALL CWC. You go to NASM.org, click wellness at the top, and you can learn all about the certification. And then when you check out, you want to use Marshall CWC to get $600 off. Rich, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, just stop using BMI for individual assessment. That's it.
Yeah, please. And stop beating yourself up about
Mhm.
your individual BMI because it's not actually relevant to your health, wellness, or well being. And hopefully, this like suite of the series of episodes has helped to evolve your thinking about kind of the culture we all were raised in and what we know now. And look, no demonizing on any of that, right? Because all of us are always trying to be a bit better, right? You wouldn't be listening to the show if you didn't want to be a bit better. And so I genuinely believe that the practitioners, our parents, the researchers, like people were doing the best with what they understood then. And now we understood more so we can be more better. And that's what we're on about. So, of course, we would love to hear your feedback. And if you want to find me out on the interwebs, you can shoot me an email. It's info@darlene.coach. My Instagram is also darlene.coach. Love to have you shoot me a DM. You can find me on LinkedIn or on my Substack. It's coachdar.substack.com. If you're a fan of the show, I hope you've already subscribed. If not, go on, do that. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like. Thank you to everyone who's written us a review. Reviews help to up us in the algorithm, push more people. And of course, if you get something out of this show, if it benefits you, if it makes you better, share, because that's actually the way that most people find podcasts, and it helps us grow and it helps get this kind of information out into the world. So thank you all for listening, and be well.